Hello and welcome to a special edition of Ask George, where we have a debrief of the last 2 months, look ahead to the home international summer for England, and take stock of what we've seen. George, most importantly, you've been back in the UK for the last couple of tests. Have you readapted to a normal way of living, not the 4 a.m. starts that we've got used to the last couple of tests?
No. Well, no, because my alarm was obviously set at sort of 3:30 or whatever during the last test, and I forgot to turn it off on the fourth day, which was a lie-in. And by then, you're so used to either that time or Indian time. So no, do you remember that I sent you the grades for the series at about 7 a.m. on Sunday or Monday morning?
Yeah.
Well, I
Sunday morning, yeah.
I just got up at 4:30 or 4 o'clock or whatever and wrote them. So no, I'm all over the place.
I'd say so far one of the more inconsequential filing times since you joined. I would suspect, but yeah,
7 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Absolutely.
Why hasn't this been published yet?
Yeah. It's not on Twitter. Why? Let's move on and try and address a couple of topics from looking back into one or two of the. Now we've allowed the dust to settle, I guess. One or two of the issues to come from that fifth test and the series overall. Obviously, Brendan McCullum has spoken since then, and we've had an opportunity to kind of reflect on things a little bit away from the sort of the heat of the result and the finale. And let's start with a general one. I mean, what would you do to improve this England team?
The thing is, you don't build from the top. You don't build a tower from the top, do you? You build foundations. And I think that English cricket is looking at quick fixes quite often, both in the short term, trying to hit bowlers out of the attack rather than playing sensibly maybe or building. And also in terms of the appointment of Brendan McCullum, I thought it was an attempt at a quick fix. Now, we know there are substantial problems, significant structural problems in the English game. And I'll give you a couple. For example, we know the county schedule is a nonsense. I think pretty much everyone would agree it's not ideal. Equally, we know the pathway is a nonsense, that we're hopelessly over-reliant on the public schools. I mean, I think this is right. About a quarter of, I think it's slightly more than a quarter actually, of county cricketers in England qualified county cricketers, went to 19 public schools.
Mm.
Imagine English cricket was getting its talent from 2,000 schools, 10,000 schools. Imagine how much better it could be. But instead of grappling with those deeply complicated issues, they've appointed a very charismatic pair who have a great slogan or two and are inspirational in many ways. But as time has gone on, I think results have absolutely returned to the normal. And I know that people don't see this or haven't necessarily agreed with me, but let me give you a little fact here. Ahead of COVID, going into COVID, that sort of Silverwood Bayliss side had won 15 of their 24 most recent tests. 15 of 24. If McCullum's England win the first test of the series against West Indies, they will have won 15 of their 24 tests. They may have done it at times with a bit more panache. I don't know about that, by the way. I think people have got quite short memories about, Cape Town or various other games. But if you take COVID out of the equation, and I do, and I know not everyone agrees, how normal was your life during COVID? Why should cricket be any different? When Stuart Broad said he thought that Ashes series should be discounted, or he had discounted it in his own head, I know what he means. Obviously, you can't. And clearly, England always have a trouble going to Australia and India. But I know where he's coming from, because the conditions were such that it was certainly not a high-performance environment. It was an environment where games were being played just to fulfill broadcasting deals. And I think we all understand why that was important at the time. And I just think that when we're analysing the situation, we should at least appreciate the context. And there is a specific context in that period. So the results now are actually exactly the same as the results pre-COVID. Yeah. And I think that what we haven't done is confront those big issues. We haven't sorted out the county schedule because we all know that it's very difficult to do. We all know that there's 1,000 different viewpoints, that it's very difficult once you've got a white ball window in the middle of the season, but yet we all understand why that white ball window is there. Instead of anyone being brave enough to grapple with those reasons, we've appointed a charismatic coach. And I think that's nonsense. Yeah, I think it's weak. And yeah, I don't think it will actually change things in the long run. Ashley Giles, just before he was sacked, said, you can sack me, you can sack the coach, you can change the captain, you'll be exactly here in 4 years' time. He said that right after the Ashes. Where do you think we're going to be after the Ashes? Exactly the same cycle. And the cycle will only change if someone's brave enough to make decisions to change it. England have won 2 tests out of 29 in India and Australia since the start of 2013. I don't think that's good enough. I think that it can be changed. And I think that that's where I'd start. Does that make sense? It's a roundabout answer to the question, but I think I got there in the end.
Yeah. Can I just ask you quickly about what you said about Brendan McCullum in particular? Actually, not to get you to repeat yourself, but more to talk about how have you found the reaction to what you've said? Because that appears to have provoked just as much discussion as the talking point itself, if not more so. Certainly, in the reaction that I've seen to it. How have you kind of received the criticism of your criticism, if that makes any sense?
I've been doing this quite a long time. And before I moved to the Cricketer, so I was at Cricinfo, yeah? And Cricinfo used to have comments, and I'm quite active on Twitter. And so I remember when I first started writing for Cricinfo being struck by the incredibly harsh responses at times. And I'll give you an example of one of my very, very first pieces, as when I was correspondent there anyway, said something like, Dobell should be shot. It was like the first or second comment. And the one under that was like, ridiculous comment, he should not be shot, he should suicide himself. And you think, you get inured to that. You really do, generally. And I also made a conscious decision, I was told when I moved to the Cricketer, that my pieces were largely going to be behind a paywall. And I knew that there would be repercussions of that. And that's I went into that consciously and understanding the reasons for that. Sometimes it's very frustrating. And so what happens if you write a 1,200 piece, or 1,200 word piece rather, which is too long, but I wrote a 1,200 word piece basically saying what I've just said to you in that first answer, I guess. And people just read a headline, you sometimes get a knee-jerk reaction, and I'm okay with that, really. You just have to live with it. At the same time, people say the headline was clickbait. I got no issues with that. As you know, I don't write the headlines. You might have written the headline. I don't know if you did, or the social media thing. I don't mind that. The job is kind of to write a clickbaity up to a point headline. So, as I say, I've been doing it quite a long time, and I understand how those things work. In terms of people who just disagree with the point, well, that's completely reasonable. People are allowed to have different views, but I see my sort of role as questioning and, I don't know, having my own views, not having to necessarily take the party line. And I think I've got a point. I mean, I was on those tours during COVID. Yeah, I did have dispensation at times to travel with the team. So they were very good about not complaining, but they were rubbish. They really were. It was quite bad.
Yeah.
As someone who spent quite a lot of time in lockdown in hotel rooms in Australia, and they were in them relentlessly. And I do think it got them down. And I do think that by the end of the Ashes in particular, I don't know, I saw quite a lot of good in Joe Root and Chris Silverwood and Ashley Giles. And I thought that the media were very critical of them. And I sort of, I never asked for Peter Moores to be sacked, or actually Trevor Bayliss, or any of them, and so the idea that I'm sort of being negative now, it's not really negative about McCullum. The point is that I don't see him as the answer. He's not the problem. Don't make any bones about it, but he's a distraction because he's this charismatic figure. And actually, I do think that his messaging to the team is unhelpful. I think it's simplistic and naive and will only take them so far. But that's not to say he's got a lot of positive qualities, and he's a man for what it's worth. I admire hugely. I thought he changed cricket for the better. I've made this point in previous podcasts. I thought he changed cricket for the better in the middle of the last decade, and I couldn't have respected him more for it. But I don't think he's in the right job for him right now. No.
Let's move on from Brendan McCullum and to something else that you wrote over the weekend. It's increasingly hard to justify England embarking on these 5 test tours. Question being, how does that remark kind of fit within the idea of preserving Test cricket and building upon what we've got rather than shrinking it? And I guess if you're ring fencing, the format to competitive series only, what's left after that?
I'm not sure I accept the premise of the second bit. So, have England been competitive in India and Australia since the start of 2013? Well, they haven't, have they?
No.
I mean, there were moments definitely on this tour when you can say they were competitive, but I just prick the bubble a wee bit there. Although it's not without some substance and truth, it was 4-1. They did lose one of those tests by an innings, and they did lose another one by a record number of runs, 400 something, yeah, 434 or something. Those aren't nail biters. So I thought that the last Ashes series or 2 was actually quite bad for the brand, particularly the COVID one, admittedly, with all those caveats I spoke about before. And although India and Australia coming to England, those 5 test series can work because they're more competitive in English conditions. They've been some very tight series, haven't they? Drawn series. I'm not positive that it's good actually for the brand of Test cricket to have uncompetitive series in that regard. So I don't think it's a great affront to England or to Test cricket to say that maybe a 3-test tour would be fine. And I include the Ashes in that. Yeah, I'm afraid I do. Which doesn't mean you can't. They could play another team instead as well. The Test summer doesn't just have to be one thing. Now, the reason it happens at the moment is it's not really about cricketing merit, and it's not really about history and heritage and all that stuff. It's about money. Of course, it's about money. And I think that the value of these series will be damaged long term if they're not competitive. Does that make sense?
Let's move on towards looking at India a little bit more. Where do you think Ashwin will rank among off-spinners when he retires? He obviously brought up.
It's really interesting.
During
coming back to watching that last game in Dharamshala on TV. In some ways, you could see things which you couldn't see if I'd been in the ground. I mean, it depends. In the perfect ground, you've got a TV and maybe commentary and stuff, but very often you don't. And Ashwin is as good an example I can think of as if you're watching from the stands, I wouldn't be able to see what he's doing. He doesn't look at this stage of his career massively athletic and you can't see spin in the same way that you could say with Shane Warne or even Murali. So watching on TV, you are struck again by the utter genius. How with minute changes in his wrist and fingers, he can make the ball go in a different direction. It's how do you compare him to Murali? I mean, they're completely different creatures, aren't they? They do different things. They're both magnificent bowlers. But even how do you compare him to, I don't know, an old Jim Laker? How would you compare them? I have no idea. They're completely different, but they're all great. All 3 that I've mentioned are great. I wouldn't even be able to compare him to Graham Swan. So it's, to saying that he's an off spinner and Shoaib Bashir an off spinner, it feels like we're barely doing the terminology, the correct thing. It's the same way as saying a VW Beetle and a Formula One Ferrari are cars. It's a pretty broad definition sometimes. But he's a magnificent bowler. And funnily enough, another off spinner said to me this morning, if it were a test in England, who would I rather have playing for my side, Nathan Lyon or Ashwin? And I said Ashwin, because I think he gives you more. Yeah, I mean, you're talking absolutely top drawer, and I'm not sure he's appreciated as much as he should be. I think he's a magician, absolutely fantastic.
Following on from that, do you have an inkling of what's changed in terms of pitches for India? I mean, they certainly weren't the same as 2021, and they look really good at times. I think we even perhaps criticised them at times for them being too good. How do you see the balance there?
Well, there's no criticism from me, I don't think. I don't think that. Which game was it? Was it Rajkot?
Was it Ranchi where we sort of questioned whether they
I thought it was Rajkot that changed, that didn't deteriorate as we thought it would, but I can't remember. Yeah, maybe it was Ranchi. Look, so what's changed? Well, there's a different captain, and he is I don't know how much say he's got. I suspect not masses, but he is a calmer man, I think. I mean, they've obviously both got huge qualities, but I think Rohit is maybe a calmer captain than Virat, and that's not always good. There were times in the series when I remember people saying they could do with a bit of Virat up and up him now, and yeah, I could see that at times. The other thing I think they really realised is they didn't need gimmicks, and by playing on sharply turning wickets, you brought England spinners into the game. Maybe you were taking the same as an FA Cup game on a dodgy pitch. You may be making the gap a wee bit smaller. I think they realised that they were the better side and they could back themselves. When you've got, Ashwin, a really good example. But actually, Kuldeep came into the series ever more, didn't he? And, it was left out for the first test. So England had predicated their selection on the idea that Axar Patel was going to be the sort of the threat, as he had been in the previous series. A fast spinner who was going to get stuff out of tricky pitches offering him some help. And he only played one test, didn't he? And instead they went for Kuldeep, who does so much in the air and so much off the pitch, They didn't need the same assistance. So I thought it was a sign of maturity, experience, and confidence, backing themselves more. I thought they got it spot on. And had they played on those sort of really wickedly turning wickets, I mean, they probably would have won anyway. But they probably would. I mean, they're very, very good in those conditions. But they didn't need to do that. And I thought what we saw was a much better exhibition, much more fun. I mean, it was until the end. I didn't think towards the end was terribly competitive. In fact, it was one-way traffic from lunch on the first day, wasn't it? At the final test. I thought they got it spot on. I thought it was mature, sensible stuff.
And it wasn't like there was an element. It's difficult to pick out an element of the bowling, particularly where you felt that England even remotely outplayed India. You think when reverse swing came into effect, you think about when it was spinning, when it wasn't. Every element of it, India outperformed England anyway. It didn't matter what the conditions were. They made the most of what was in front of them, much better than England did.
Did Ben Stokes finish top of the bowling averages?
No, absolutely. Let's look straight. Let's just publish Cricket Archive every time we need to. Let's do that instead of these. That'd be a lot easier. Let's move on to something sort of away from the cricket, I guess. And what was while you were out in India for the test that you were? What was your best touring experience while you were there?
I don't know, because the reality of modern touring is very pragmatic, and I can tell you a memory that will stick with me, but I don't want to get anyone in trouble, so I don't want to be indiscreet. But there were a few things that will stick with me. I mean, the cricket was really good fun, but you know, on a tour, I can't remember what year. No, it must have been 13, the 13 Ashes. Jared and I drove across Australia. You know, we drove from Brisbane to Mount Isa, Alice into Adelaide. Hell of a journey. And we had time to do that and to make videos every day about all the dead kangaroos we saw and all that sort of stuff. Brilliant experience. There's no time for that anymore. There's no time. So a typical day, you know, I'll be setting my alarm for sort of 6:30 at Hyderabad, for example, which is a lot of fun, but you're getting up early. It's taking an hour to get to the game. I like to get there early. The game starts at 9:30. So you know what I mean? And then you've got to do it all back again and getting back to it longer. You've got to film this and stuff. What do you want me to be doing? I mean, you know, so I didn't, I'm afraid, have those great cultural experiences that I would have liked. I have been quite a few times, and it sounds awful to say, but one of the things I enjoyed most was the food. I mean, the food in India is preposterously good. Particularly, I'm not really eating meat anymore because you don't really need to. Although you do if you eat vegetarian food in England. But the cauliflower in India is just such a joy. Well, it's not in England, is it? If you think of cauliflower cheese in a school canteen or something. So that was a real pleasure. The company of colleagues. I do remember, I think the Hyderabad test finished in the last over of the fourth day. Is that right?
Very much, yeah.
West Indies had just won against Australia, yeah? And there'd been a huge cheer in the press box. In fact, we all gathered around basically one laptop and we're watching it. And there was a lot of excitement for that. So when you're doing this day in, day out, you don't get that wrapped up in the result, yeah? So when no one wanted it to go into a fifth day, if we're honest, yeah, because the round journey was not easy. It was every bit of an hour to get there and an hour and a half to get back, and you know, all the stuff along with it and the waiting and all the rest of it. There was quite a big cheer. Was achieved. And I don't want to get people in trouble. I mean, I'm not saying that Indian journalists were happy that India lost. Of course they weren't. Of course they weren't. But it's human nature
to
enjoy days off. Not that you have them. So I'm afraid I didn't go up any amazing. I didn't walk up the mountains this time. I mean, I didn't make it to Dharamshala. And I didn't. Sorry, I've just lost the screen. Oh, there we go. Someone's phoning me. I don't know how that's happened. So I didn't do anything terribly exciting this time. And but yeah, I enjoyed the cricket and the cricket grounds. I don't know if there's a question on this, but I thought it really worked staging the games in somewhat different venues.
Yeah.
And they were, the attendances were really, really good. You know, the atmosphere in Vizag and stuff was absolutely brilliant, and Rajkot too most of the time. So it was. I thought it was a very successful series for cricket, and it got people talking. And England were fun enough and competitive enough for at least half the series that it was. I don't know. It felt like time went terribly fast.
I'm pretty sure that the cricketer management will be delighted to hear that your outstanding memory was watching West Indies beat Australia on a laptop in India.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, honestly, I'm not. I hope this doesn't sound glib. There's not really a day goes by when I don't think, aren't I lucky to be here? And particularly actually watching this England side, for all the criticisms I've given them, they are a lot of fun to watch. But I have thought that many times. You know, that Leeds game in 2019, it's crazy. That New Zealand test of 2015, the Bangladesh tour of 2016. I mean, I do think that quite often, and you know, I haven't decided where I'm going at the start of the county season yet. But I promise you, the day I drive through the gates at Edgbaston New Road, if it is at New Road twinned with Atlantis.
Not New Road, no.
Yeah, then or Kidderminster. Then I'll be thinking that again. I'll be thinking, I'm incredibly fortunate to be here and, you know, basically get paid to do something that I love. I don't really feel I work. Shouldn't say that either, should I?